In 295 BC, according to the Roman historian Livy, a consul stood on a battlefield in central Italy and performed a ritual that would shock even hardened warriors. Publius Decius Mus veiled his head in the purple-bordered toga praetexta, stood upon a spear thrust into the ground, and spoke words that dedicated both his own life and the lives of his enemies to the gods of the underworld. Then he mounted his horse and charged alone into thousands of Gallic warriors, seeking his own death. This wasn't suicide. It was the most calculated tactical decision in Roman military history. Think about the situation that made this necessary. Contemporary sources record that Rome faced a coalition of 4 peoples: Samnites, Etruscans, Umbrians, and Sentinum Gauls. Historical estimates suggest forces exceeding 80,000 warriors converged on a single battlefield. This was the largest military engagement ever fought on Italian soil up to that point. The stakes? Nothing less than whether Rome would survive as an independent power or be crushed by the greatest alliance ever assembled against them. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a ritual human sacrifice changed the momentum of Rome's most dangerous battle, how a patient general named Fabius defeated enemies through exhaustion alone, and why this forgotten engagement determined who would rule the ancient world. I'm about to reveal 3 documented facts that will change how you see ancient warfare. First, the tactical patience that Fabius Maximus Rullianus displayed, a strategy his great-grandson would use to frustrate Hannibal decades later. Second, why the Romans deliberately split their coalition enemies through a diversionary raid that historians call a masterpiece of strategic deception. Third, the specific religious formula that Decius Mus recited before his death, words preserved in historical sources that show how Romans weaponized their own belief system. But here's what makes this historically fascinating. How did Roman commanders, facing an army that potentially outnumbered them and included some of history's most feared warriors, win so decisively that they killed or captured 33,000 enemies while losing fewer than 9,000 of their own men? What made the Gallic war chariots, weapons that had terrorized Roman cavalry, suddenly ineffective? Why did Gallius Ignatius, the Samnite general who had masterminded this grand coalition, die at his own camp gates rather than in the main battle lines? And how did the death of a single consul transform a Roman retreat into a victorious advance? The answers lie in a perfect combination of religious psychology, tactical brilliance, and Rome's emerging dominance of Italian warfare. To understand how a man's ritualized death changed the course of Italian history, we need to go back 3 years to 298 BC. When the Samnites made one final desperate attempt to stop Rome's relentless expansion. The year 298 BC marked the end of Rome's longest period of peace in a generation. For 6 years, the treaty that concluded the Second Samnite War had held. But peace had not brought the Samnites security. It had brought suffocation. During those 6 years, according to historical records, Rome founded 13 colonies in a ring around Samnite territory. Each was a dagger pointed at the Samnite heartland. New rustic tribes organized confiscated land into permanent Roman presence. The Samnites, watching Roman settlements multiply on their borders like a noose tightening, understood what this meant. Rome wasn't planning to coexist. Rome was planning to strangle. The strategy was brilliant and brutal. Every colony positioned Roman citizens on Samnite borders, armed and ready. Every tribe established Roman law and Roman loyalty on land that had been Italic just years before. The Samnites could see their future, isolated in their mountain homeland, surrounded by enemies, waiting for the final conquest that Roman expansion made inevitable. They had fought Rome before and knew the Republic's relentless arithmetic. Rome had more people, more land, more allies. In a war of attrition, Samnites would always lose. In early 298 BC, Lucanian envoys arrived in Rome with a request. The Samnites had invaded their territory, attempting to force them into alliance. The Roman Senate, recognizing opportunity, accepted the alliance immediately. Fetiales, Rome's sacred heralds, delivered an ultimatum to Samnium: withdraw from Lucania or face war. The Samnites refused. War was declared. But this time, the Samnites had a plan. The Samnites faced a strategic nightmare. Surrounded by Roman allies, their mountain homeland could support fierce defense, but not offensive victory. Previous wars had proven they could win individual battles. The humiliation at Caudine Forks in 321 BC stood as evidence of their capabilities. But they couldn't win wars of attrition against Rome's superior manpower and logistics. Rome simply had too many people, too much land, too many cities willing to provide troops and supplies. The Second Samnite War had lasted over 20 years and ended with Samnite defeat despite tactical victories. A third war fought the same way would end the same way. Ignatius, leader of the Variani clan and the most sophisticated strategist the Samnites ever produced, understood the mathematics of survival. The Samnites couldn't defeat Rome in their mountains. They needed to transform this into a war on multiple fronts, in territories where Rome's advantages would dissolve. That meant marching north to Etruria, where wealthy cities resented Roman encroachment. It meant recruiting the fierce Senoan Gauls who occupied the Adriatic coast. It meant building the largest anti-Roman coalition Italy had ever seen. What Ignatius achieved in the following months would terrify Rome more than anything. Since the Gallic sack of 390 BC, he was about to create a coalition that, on paper, should have destroyed the Republic. Gellius Ignatius understood something that previous Samnite leaders had not. Rome couldn't be defeated in the mountains of Samnium, but it could be overwhelmed in Etruria. The war's opening campaigns went disastrously for the Samnites. Roman consuls Quintus Fabius, Maximus Rullianus, and Publius Decius Mus, both veterans with decades of military experience, penetrated deep into Samnite territory. At Typhernum in 297 BC, Rullianus defeated a Samnite ambush with tactical precision. Roman armies spent 4 months ravaging Samnite lands virtually unopposed, earning the consuls 6-month extensions of their commands as proconsuls. The message was clear. Conventional warfare in Samnium was suicide. In 296 BC, Ignatius executed a maneuver that completely bypassed Roman blocking forces. He led his army north through the Apennine passes into Etruria, a march of remarkable strategic audacity. Historical sources document this movement as forcing Rome to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously, a situation that created near panic in the Senate. Roman military planning assumed Samnite forces would defend their homeland. Finding Samnite armies operating freely in Etruria, rallying Rome's traditional enemies, was a nightmare scenario Roman commanders hadn't prepared for. The Etruscans joined first. Wealthy cities like Perugia, Clusium, and Arretium had watched Roman power grow for decades, had seen their trading networks disrupted, their autonomy eroded. Ignatius offered them what they wanted most: a chance to reverse Roman dominance before it became irreversible. According to Livy's account, Ignatius personally attended Etruscan councils, explaining why Etruscans and Samnites should unite. He argued that Samnites alone couldn't defeat Rome, but the strong Samnites, combined with the wealthiest cities in Italy, could punish the belligerent Romans who mistreated their neighbors. The argument worked. Etruscan city-states voted for joint war. The Umbrians, caught between Roman expansion and Etruscan interests, aligned with the coalition. Most significantly, Ignatius secured the commitment of the Sentinum Gauls. Sources indicate substantial payments in gold convinced the Gauls to join. The Gauls would bring their most feared weapon, war chariots that could shatter cavalry formations. On paper, the coalition was overwhelming. Historians estimate the combined forces approached 80,000 warriors, possibly more if full mobilization occurred. 4 different military traditions: disciplined Samnite, heavy infantry, who fought like Romans; wealthy Etruscan hoplites with sophisticated equipment; mobile Umbrian auxiliaries; and Gallic shock troops whose ferocity was legendary across Europe. But the coalition had a fatal vulnerability that Ignatius himself understood. These weren't true allies bound by common interest. They were separate peoples with separate territories, united only by shared fear of Rome. If that unity could be broken, the entire structure would collapse. And break it Rome would. But first, they needed to elect the only 2 men who could face this apocalyptic threat and survive. When the Roman Senate faced the coalition crisis of 295 BC, they turned to a man who had fought more battles than any living Roman. Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus, at roughly 50 years old, had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of war. Rullianus first entered history in 325 BC as Magister Equitum, Master of Horse, serving under the dictator Lucius Papirius Cursor during the Second Samnite War. When Papirius returned to Rome for religious observances, he explicitly ordered Rullianus not to engage the enemy. Rullianus, seeing an opportunity, ignored the command and attacked the Samnites near Imbrinium. He won decisively. Papirius, upon his return, was furious. According to Livy's account, the dictator demanded execution for insubordination. Only intervention by the Senate, the Roman people, and Rullianus's father, Marcus Fabius Ambustus, saved his life. The victory was too spectacular to ignore. The disobedience was too blatant to forgive. It established a pattern. Rullianus was brilliant, but willing to risk everything for glory. That early controversy revealed something essential about his character. He understood when rules could be broken, and when enemies could be beaten through actions others considered too dangerous. Rullianus served as consul 5 times. In 322, 310, 308, 297, and 295 BC. He was dictator at least once, possibly twice. As censor in 304 BC, he shaped Rome's military and social structure. Modern historians estimate he fought more than 35 major engagements between 322 and 291 BC. In 322 BC, he campaigned successfully in both Samnium and Apulia, earning his first triumph. In 315 BC, as dictator, he captured the Samnite city of Saticula, but suffered his only documented defeat at Lautulae, a rare blemish on an otherwise spotless record. In 310 BC, he relieved the siege of Sutrium, forcing Etruscan armies to retreat by seizing elevated terrain and forcing them to attack uphill. His ability to exploit geography would become legendary. Contemporary sources describe his campaigns with consistent themes: patience, careful positioning, waiting for the enemy to make mistakes. Rullianus didn't win through reckless aggression despite that early incident at Imbrinium. He won through patience, Study his documented battles and a pattern emerges. He waited for enemies to exhaust themselves. At Sutrium, he made the Etruscans climb hills. At Centinum, he would make the Samnites attack until their arms could no longer raise their weapons. He understood something fundamental about human endurance, that discipline and superior logistics could defeat numerical superiority if you were willing to endure the waiting. Rullianus was the first in the Fabius family to earn the cognomen Maximus, the greatest. It would become hereditary. His son, Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurgis, would serve 3 consulships. His great-grandson, Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, would use the same patient tactics against Hannibal decades later, earning the nickname Cunctator, the delayer. The strategic patience that Rullianus would display at Sentinum would echo through generations of Roman military doctrine. But Rullianus understood he couldn't face this coalition alone. He demanded a specific man as his consular colleague, Publius Decius Mus, a warrior from a family that had turned self-sacrifice into military doctrine. The gens Decia, the Decius family, had a reputation that made even hardened Roman soldiers uncomfortable. They were the family that didn't retreat. They were the family that bought victory with their own blood. In 340 BC, at the Battle of Veseris during the Latin War, the elder Publius Decius Mus, father of our consul, commanded the left wing of the Roman army. According to Livy's detailed account, both he and his colleague Titus Manlius Torquatus shared the same dream the night before battle. A ghostly figure told them that one commander must devote himself and the enemy army to the gods of the underworld to secure victory. When the left wing began to falter under Latin pressure, Decius Mus called for the Pontifex Maximus Marcus Valerius. The priest prescribed the ritual formula. Decius stood on a spear thrust into the ground, veiled his head with his toga, and recited words dedicating his life and all enemy lives to the Daemones, the spirits of the dead, and to Mother Earth. Then he charged alone into the enemy lines. Livy records that the Latins, struck with supernatural awe, refused to engage him at first, eventually bringing him down with a storm of javelins. Even in death, they left a wide space around his body. The Roman left wing, once collapsing, rallied and swept through the gap left by the terrified Latins. Publius Decius Mus, the younger, born into this legacy of sacrifice, served Rome with distinction for nearly 2 decades before Centinum. He was elected consul 4 times, in 312, 308, 297, and 295 BC. Unlike Rullianus, whose style was patient and calculated, Decius preferred aggressive action. In 308 BC, he campaigned successfully against the Etruscans, forcing multiple cities to sue for truces. In 297 BC, he served as consul alongside Rullianus for the first time. The partnership worked. They shared 3 consulships together, their contrasting styles complementing each other. Fabius, the patient strategist; Decius, the aggressive shock commander. To modern minds, devotio seems like religious fanaticism. To Romans, it was a legitimate military tactic with documented procedures. The ritual required specific conditions, dire circumstances threatening defeat, a commanding officer of appropriate rank, a priest to prescribe the exact formula, and witnesses to verify proper execution. The formula itself, preserved in multiple sources, called upon Janus, Jupiter, Mars, Quirinus, Bellona, the Lares, the Daemones, and Mother Earth. The commander didn't just offer his own life. He legally transferred all the divine wrath meant for Roman forces onto the enemy. This wasn't suicide. It was a religious transaction with tactical consequences. The psychological impact worked on multiple levels. For Roman soldiers, seeing their commander willingly die transformed panic into religious fervor. They believed themselves now fighting under divine protection, the curse transferred to the enemy. For enemies, the sight of a high-ranking commander charging alone toward death while reciting incomprehensible prayers in a language associated with powerful rituals created supernatural dread. The Latins at Viserys refused to close with Decius the Elder. The Gauls at Sentinum would react similarly. Whether the gods actually intervened is irrelevant. Roman soldiers and their enemies believed they did, and belief shapes battlefield behavior as much as tactics. In 295 BC, as reports of Gellius Ignatius's coalition reached Rome, the Senate made a decision they hadn't made in decades. They would elect both Rullianus and Decius Mus as consuls simultaneously, giving Rome's two most experienced commanders joint command. One patient, one aggressive. One focused on attrition, one on shock. Against a coalition of 4 peoples, they would need both. The spring of 295 BC brought Rome's darkest fear to reality. Intelligence reports confirmed it. Gellius Ignatius had successfully united all 4 peoples. The coalition army was massing in Umbria. If the Etruscans, Umbrians, Samnites, and Gauls remained united, they would outnumber the Roman forces significantly. The Romans assembled the largest military force they'd ever fielded. The consuls, Fabius Rullianus and Decius Mus, commanded 4 legions plus substantial allied contingents, approximately 38,000 to 40,000 men. Each legion brought its standard complement of cavalry, supplemented by a special force of 1,000 elite Campanian cavalry, some of the finest horsemen in Italy. But numbers alone wouldn't suffice. Another consul, Lucius Volumnius Flamiviolens, took 2 legions to Samnium itself in a diversionary campaign. His mission: force the Samnites to worry about their homeland, potentially drawing troops away from the northern coalition. Additionally, 2 reserve contingents under propraetors positioned themselves in the Faliscan district and near the Vatican Hill to protect Rome itself if the coalition broke through. Then came information that changed everything. Deserters from Clusium, an Etruscan city, reached Fabius's camp with intelligence about Ignatius's battle plan. The coalition intended to use a 2-phase attack. The Samnites and Gauls would engage the Roman army in full battle. During the fighting, when the Roman lines were fully committed, the Etruscans and Umbrians would emerge from their separate camp, circle around the battlefield, and assault the Roman camp itself, with their base destroyed and supplies lost. Even a Roman tactical victory would become a strategic disaster. The Romans would be trapped between 2 armies with nowhere to retreat. Fabius responded with a masterstroke of strategic deception. He ordered the reserve units stationed near Rome, those protecting the city itself, to march immediately to the Etruscan heartland around Clusium and Perusia. Their orders were simple and brutal: ravage everything, burn crops, destroy farms, threaten the cities themselves. The Etruscans and Umbrians, receiving reports of attacks on their homeland, faced an impossible choice. They could continue with Ignatius's plan, potentially winning the battle but losing their homes. Or they could withdraw to defend their territories. They chose their homes. The coalition that had taken years to build fractured in days. The Etruscans and Umbrians departed, reducing the enemy force from potentially 80,000 warriors to roughly 40,000 to 50,000, still formidable, but no longer overwhelming. Ignatius, realizing his grand strategy had collapsed, withdrew his remaining forces, the Samnites and Senoni Gauls, to the plain near Centinum in Umbrian territory, near modern Sassoferrato. The location offered open ground suitable for the large armies, with a small river cutting through the center of the plain. For 2 days, the armies faced each other across the field without engaging. The Romans were cautious, operating in hostile territory. Ignatius waited, hoping against hope that the Etruscans and Umbrians might return. They didn't. On the 3rd day, Ignatius could wait no longer. His troops, eager for battle and confident in their numbers, were becoming restless. The Romans, seeing no reinforcements arriving for the coalition, began harassment operations, cavalry raids, skirmishes with light infantry designed to provoke. Finally, Ignatius led his entire army out of camp and offered battle. The Battle of the Nations was about to begin. The plain near Centinum stretched flat and dusty, perhaps a mile wide, broken only by the Sanguirone River cutting through its center. Dawn on that 3rd day revealed both armies deploying for battle. Tens of thousands of men arranging themselves in formations that had been refined over centuries of Italian warfare. The actual location of the battle within Centinum's territory remains uncertain to modern archaeologists. But the plain immediately north of the ancient city fits the tactical requirements. The Sanguirone River, now a small stream, likely ran stronger in antiquity, creating a natural division that may have separated the 2 wings of each army. Open ground favored the Roman manipular system. Their flexible checkerboard formation required space to maneuver. The Gauls, accustomed to charging warfare, needed room for their war chariots. Gallius Ignatius positioned his Samnites on the coalition's left wing, opposite the Roman right. Livy doesn't mention Samnite cavalry specifically, but standard practice would have placed mounted troops covering their left flank, with the river protecting their right. The Senone Gauls formed on the coalition's right wing, their most substantial cavalry force protecting their own right flank, the traditionally vulnerable, unshielded side in ancient warfare. Between the infantry lines, and probably behind the initial formations, sat the Gallic war chariots. Sources disagree dramatically on their numbers. Some ancient accounts claim 1,000 or more as part of the exaggerated coalition army of 330,000 that Livy dismisses as unrealistic. More conservative estimates, consistent with typical Gallic warfare practices, suggest perhaps 100 chariots, still a significant force. These were the Essida, light 2-wheeled vehicles drawn by small horses, carrying a driver and javelin throwers, designed to crash through cavalry formations and create chaos. Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus took position commanding the Roman right wing with the 1st and 3rd legions, placing himself directly opposite the Samnites. Publius Decius Mus commanded the left wing with the 5th and 6th legions, facing the Gauls. The 1,000 elite Campanian cavalry deployed with Rullianus on the right flank. Those sources suggest they may have been divided between both wings. The Latin and allied contingents, which outnumbered the Roman citizen legions, filled supporting positions, though Livy's account focuses almost exclusively on the legionary combat. Each legion used the triplex aces, the 3-line system with hastati, youngest soldiers, in front, principes, experienced men in their prime, in the 2nd line, and triarii, veterans, in the 3rd. This gave each wing tactical depth and the ability to cycle fresh troops to the front. As the armies arrayed themselves, Livy records an omen that both sides interpreted. A hind, pursued by a wolf, ran across the plain between the armies. The hind turned toward the Gallic lines, where warriors killed it. The wolf turned toward the Roman lines. The soldiers opened ranks to let it pass through safely. To the Romans, wolves were sacred to Mars, father of Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome. The omen was clear. The gods demanded the slaughter of the Gauls, represented by the dead hind, while protecting the sons of the wolf. Whether this actually occurred or was later propaganda to explain Roman victory is debatable among historians. What matters is that Roman soldiers believed it, and morale is its own tactical advantage. Two armies, each roughly 40,000 strong, each certain of divine favor, each composed of warriors who had trained their entire lives for this moment. Roman discipline against Samnite determination against Gallic fury. Fabius's patience against Ignatius's desperation against the Gallic hunger for glory. The sun rose higher. The commanders gave their final orders. And then, after hours of positioning and preparation, the armies began to move. The battle began not with trumpets or dramatic charges, but with the methodical approach of professional infantry. On both wings simultaneously, the hastati, Rome's youngest soldiers forming the first line, closed the distance at a walk, shields raised, pila ready. At approximately 30 meters, the Roman hastati launched their pila in coordinated volleys. The pilum, Rome's signature weapon, wasn't designed primarily to kill. Its soft iron shank was engineered to bend on impact, making shields unusable and preventing enemies from throwing it back. Thousands of these javelins arced through the air simultaneously on both wings. The Samnites, who fought with similar equipment and tactics, knew what was coming. They raised their scuda, large shields, and absorbed the impact. The Gauls, less disciplined but more aggressive, tried to catch or deflect the pila with their flat wooden shields. Many succeeded, many didn't. The pilum that struck true punched through wood and leather, bending on impact, turning shields into unwieldy burdens that warriors had to discard or carry uselessly into melee. On the Roman right, Fabius had given specific orders that revealed his tactical philosophy. His hastati and principes were not to press the attack. They were to stand their ground, use their shields defensively, and wait. This wasn't cowardice. It was calculation. Fabius knew the Samnites fought with the same manipular system Rome used, the same training, similar equipment. The Samnites had proven in previous wars they could match Roman discipline. But Fabius also knew something about Samnite psychology from decades of fighting them. They fought with intensity that couldn't be sustained for hours. Their initial assaults were ferocious, but if you could absorb that fury, if you could make them expend their strength against defensive lines, eventually exhaustion would make them vulnerable. So the Roman right wing became a wall of bronze and wood. Shields locked, gladi, short swords, stabbing through gaps, but never advancing, never pursuing, never breaking formation. On the Roman left, Publius Decius Mus adopted the opposite approach. Where Fabius sought patient attrition, Decius wanted aggressive shock. His hastati didn't just receive the Gallic charge. They met it with their own forward momentum. The collision was catastrophic. Gallic warriors, many fighting without armor in the Celtic tradition of religious battlefield nudity, swung their long iron-slashing swords, spathi, in downward arcs designed to split shields and skulls. The Romans, protected by chainmail or bronze pectorals and wielding the gladius in close quarters, turned the melee into brutal knife-fighting range where their training advantages dominated. The Gauls were individually terrifying warriors, but the Romans were professionals who fought as units, who cycled wounded men back and fresh fighters forward, who maintained killing efficiency even in chaos. After the first brutal exchanges, both wings settled into grinding combat that neither side clearly dominated. On the right, the Samnites hurled themselves at Fabius's defensive line repeatedly, expending energy against shields that wouldn't break. On the left, Decius's aggressive tactics had blunted the initial Gallic fury, but the Gauls weren't breaking. The battle Livy describes, if both armies truly numbered around 40,000 each, would have stretched across perhaps a mile of frontage, creating multiple simultaneous combats. The Hastati who had started the fight began cycling back through the gaps in the manipular formation, allowing fresh principes to move forward. The Roman system was working as designed, but so far, no advantage had emerged for either side. Stalemates in ancient warfare rarely lasted long. Commanders sought advantages, soldiers grew desperate or opportunistic. And on the Roman left wing, Publius Decius Mus was about to make a decision that would turn his sector from grinding infantry combat into absolute chaos. Publius Decius Mus, watching his infantry grind against the Gauls without decisive result, saw an opportunity that matched his aggressive instincts. The Gallic cavalry, positioned on their right flank, offered a target. If he could break them, he could roll up the Gallic line from the flank. Decius ordered his cavalry, Roman equities, and possibly some of the elite Campanian horsemen, to charge the Gallic mounted troops. The first charge succeeded. Roman cavalry, trained for coordinated shock tactics, broke through the Gallic horsemen and drove them back. The second charge, pressed with even more aggression, pushed the Gauls further from the infantry battle. Decius likely envisioned exploiting this success, turning the Gallic flank and creating the collapse that would win the battle. He ordered a third charge. The third cavalry charge brought the Romans into contact with weapons they had never faced. The Sentinum war chariots. Livy uses two Latin terms, Sentinum and charis, suggesting different types of vehicles, though both served similar purposes. These weren't the heavy scythe chariots of Persian armies. Celtic chariots were light, two-wheeled platforms drawn by small, fast horses. Each carried a driver and one or two warriors armed with javelins. Their tactical purpose wasn't to crash into enemy formations like later tank warfare. They served as mobile firing platforms, creating chaos through speed and noise, breaking up enemy formations so infantry could exploit the gaps. The Roman horses, according to Livy, had never encountered such weapons. The noise was overwhelming, wooden wheels on hard ground, the shouting of chariot crews, the clash of equipment. The motion was alien, vehicles darting at high speed between cavalry formations, warriors hurling javelins while moving. Roman cavalry horses, trained to tolerate the chaos of infantry combat, panicked at this unfamiliar threat. The charge didn't just stop, it reversed. Horses turned and fled, their riders unable to control them. The routed cavalry crashed back through their own infantry lines. What followed was every Roman commander's nightmare. The fleeing cavalry smashed through the carefully maintained manipular formation of the 5th and 6th legions. Gaps opened in the lines. Cohesion shattered. The very system that made Roman infantry superior, the ability to maintain formation while cycling fresh troops forward, depended on ordered gaps between maniples. Panicked cavalry crashing through those gaps turned tactical flexibility into chaos. And the Gauls, seeing Roman disorder, launched a massive infantry assault. The Roman left wing wasn't just struggling anymore, it was on the verge of collapse. If it broke completely, the Gallic infantry would sweep around behind the Roman right, trapping Fabius's legions between two enemy armies. On the Roman left, disaster was seconds away. Decius Mus, seeing his legions breaking under the Gallic assault, his cavalry scattered, his careful tactics turned against him by weapons he'd never faced, realized that conventional command wouldn't save his wing. He needed something that went beyond tactics. He needed the gods themselves. and he knew exactly how to get their attention. Publius Decius Mus shouted orders to his retreating men, attempting to rally units that had dissolved into individual survival. According to Livy's account, he tried physically stopping soldiers who were fleeing, calling back scattered formations. Nothing worked. The panic was beyond conventional command. The 5th and 6th legions, moments before disciplined killing machines, had become a mob of frightened men running from supernatural-seeming chariots and relentless Gallic infantry. Decius invoked his father's name, Publius Decius Mus, hero of Veziris, and asked himself aloud why he delayed the destined fate of his family. The devotio ritual required specific conditions, all of which were now present. Roman forces facing imminent defeat. A consul with imperium, command authority granted by the people, present on the field. A pontifex, priest, to prescribe the exact religious formula. And Marcus Livius, whom Decius had kept by his side throughout the battle for exactly this purpose. Decius ordered Livius to recite the prescribed form by which he would devote himself and the enemy legions to Tellus, Mother Earth, and the Daimones, the spirits of the dead. The ritual began with specific garments and positioning. Decius donned the toga praetexta, the white toga with purple border worn by magistrates. He girded himself in the _0_, an archaic method of wrapping the toga that left the right arm free for combat. He stood on a spear that had been thrust point first into the ground, establishing sacred space. He veiled his head with the toga's fold, an act that symbolized his transition from living commander to sacrificial offering. The Pontifex Marcus Livius recited the formula that Livy claims was preserved in the pontifical books, the official religious records. The formula invoked Janus, god of beginnings and transitions; Jupiter, king of the gods; Mars, god of war; Quirinus, the deified Romulus; Bellona, goddess of war; the Lares, household gods protecting Roman families; the Daimones, spirits of the dead; and Tellus, Mother Earth, who would receive the sacrifice. The traditional formula, used by his father at Veziris, dedicated the devoter and the enemy forces to the underworld gods in exchange for Roman victory. But according to multiple sources, Publius Decius Mus added his own expansion to the traditional words. Livy records the additional curse in Book 10, chapter 28, verses 16 and 17. In the translation preserved in historical texts, Decius proclaimed, "I carry before me terror and rout and carnage and blood and the wrath of all the gods, those above and those below. I will infect the standards, the armor, the weapons of the enemy with dire and manifold death. The place of my destruction shall also witness that of the Gauls and Samnites." This wasn't prayer. It was curse. He wasn't asking the gods for favor. He was declaring that divine wrath would manifest physically on this battlefield, that fear itself would become a weapon, that the location of his death would become the location of enemy annihilation. The ritual complete, Decius transferred command to his subordinate officers. Then he mounted his horse and spurred it toward the densest concentration of Gallic warriors he could see. He went alone. No bodyguard, no supporting troops, no tactical formation. A Roman consul in full religious regalia, charging solo into thousands of enemy infantry. The Gauls, seeing this, reportedly reacted with confusion and dread. The devotio had proven psychologically devastating when Decius's father performed it against the Latins 45 years earlier. Sources describe enemies paralyzed by supernatural terror. Whether the Gauls at Centinum experienced identical fear is less certain. But the ritual achieved its intended psychological effect on both armies. Decius was killed by a storm of missiles, javelins, stones, whatever the Gauls could hurl at this charging madman. His horse likely went down first. Then the man himself disappeared under the weight of Gallic projectiles. But his death transformed both armies' psychology instantly. The Roman soldiers on the left wing, who moments before had been fleeing in panic, saw their consul deliberately seek death through religious ritual. They understood what this meant. The curse had transferred to the enemy. Divine protection now covered Roman forces. They were no longer fighting alone. They fought with the gods' direct intervention. The panic that had gripped them transformed into religious fury. The Gauls, whether they understood Roman religious beliefs or simply recognized the unnatural courage of a commander charging to certain death, saw momentum shift. The Roman infantry that had been breaking now turned and counterattacked. Fresh troops cycled forward through the manipular system's gaps. The Gallic advance, which moments before had seemed unstoppable, ground to a halt against soldiers who now believed themselves invincible. But the battle's outcome still hung uncertain. The Roman left had stabilized, but not broken through. On the right wing, Fabius Maximus Rullianus watched the Samnites exhaust themselves against his defensive lines, and he recognized the moment he'd been waiting for since dawn. For hours, Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus had done something that contradicted every instinct of Roman martial culture. He had refused to attack. Roman military tradition glorified aggression, the charge, the assault, the relentless forward pressure. But Rullianus understood a truth that modern military analysis of ancient warfare confirms. Sustained close combat in armor, in heat, while continuously swinging weapons, creates severe physical exhaustion within 15 to 30 minutes of intense fighting. The Samnites, attacking his defensive lines repeatedly for what was likely 2 to 3 hours of battle, had exceeded any sustainable combat load by an order of magnitude. The Samnites fought with equipment nearly identical to Roman gear. Heavy shields, chainmail or bronze protection, short swords, javelins. They used tactics the Romans had partly learned from them during the previous wars. But tactics and equipment only mattered if soldiers had the strength to use them. Rullianus watched enemy formations become ragged. He saw Samnite attacks lose intensity. The warriors who had hurled themselves at Roman shields with ferocious energy in the battle's first hour now advanced more slowly. Struck with less force, needed longer pauses between assaults. Exhaustion was doing what Roman aggression couldn't have achieved. It was breaking Samnite combat effectiveness without breaking Roman formations. Then news reached Rullianus that changed everything. Publius Decius Mus had performed devotio. The Roman left, which had been collapsing, was now rallying and counterattacking. The Gauls were stalled. Rullianus recognized this as the tactical moment that battle-hardened commanders spend entire careers waiting for. His enemies were exhausted. His allies were advancing. His own troops remained relatively fresh, having fought defensively while the enemy expended their strength. If he struck now with coordinated fury, the Samnite line wouldn't just retreat, it would shatter. Rullianus ordered a complex multi-axis assault. The elite Campanian cavalry, 500 horsemen according to Livy's specific count, received orders to sweep around the Samnite left flank. Simultaneously, the Principes and Triarii, Rome's 2nd and 3rd infantry lines, who had been held in reserve, were ordered forward to reinforce the Hastati, who had been holding the defensive position. The Samnites, who had been attacking all morning and now faced fresh Roman troops advancing while cavalry threatened their flank, broke almost immediately. exhaustion had stolen their ability to respond to coordinated pressure. The Samnite retreat became a rout. Warriors threw down their shields to run faster. Units dissolved into individuals fleeing toward their camp. Livy records that Gellius Ignatius died during this collapse, though not in the main battle lines. The Samnites fled past the Gallic formations, heading for their fortified camp. As they reached it, the camp gates couldn't accommodate the thousands of men trying to force their way through simultaneously. According to Livy Book 10, Chapter 29, those who were consequently excluded from the overcrowded gates attempted resistance just at the foot of the rampart. It was here that Gellius Ignatius fell. The architect of the Four-People Coalition, the Samnite leader who had accomplished what no Italian commander had achieved before, uniting Etruscans, Umbrians, Gauls, and Samnites against Rome, died in a desperate last stand at his own fortifications. His death removed any possibility of Samnite reorganization. Without their commander, with their line broken and their camp threatened, the Samnites ceased to exist as a fighting force. But the battle wasn't over. The Sentinum Gauls, seeing their Samnite allies flee and Roman forces now turning toward them, made a decision that would earn respect from Roman military historians for centuries. They refused to run. The Sentinum Gauls, abandoned by their Samnite allies and facing the full weight of victorious Roman legions, formed a defensive position that demonstrated tactical sophistication few Romans expected from, quote, 2. They created a testudo, literally, quote, 3, a shield formation with warriors locking shields in front and raising shields overhead to create complete protection. This was typically a Roman siege technique, used when approaching walls under missile fire. The Gauls, having fought Romans for decades and learned their methods, adapted it for defensive warfare. Picture approximately 10 to 15,000 warriors, possibly fewer after casualties from earlier fighting, forming a compact mass with shields creating an impenetrable shell. Javelins and stones bounced off the overhead protection. Roman gladi, designed for thrusting in close quarters, couldn't penetrate the locked shields from the front. The Romans had broken the Samnites through combined arms coordination, cavalry flanking and fresh infantry pressing forward. But the Gauls had eliminated the flanking opportunity by forming a compact defensive ball. Every approach led to locked shields and stabbing spears. The Roman infantry pressed against the testudo without breaking it. Soldiers tried to pry shields apart with their swords, hook them with javelins, force gaps through brute strength. The Gauls held. Hours of fighting, the exhaustion that had broken the Samnites, the religious fervor following Decius's devotio. None of it mattered against a purely defensive formation that didn't need to move or attack, only endure. Rullianus recognized he needed a different solution. The Campanian cavalry, which had broken the Samnite left flank, now offered the answer to breaking the Gallic testudo. Livy provides a specific number: 500 Campanian horsemen. These weren't typical Roman equites. They were elite cavalry from one of Italy's wealthiest regions, men who had trained their entire lives for mounted warfare, equipped with the finest weapons Roman money could purchase. Rullianus ordered them to attack the testudo from the rear, while Roman infantry pressed from the front and sides simultaneously. The testudo, designed to protect against frontal assault and overhead missiles, couldn't rotate quickly enough to face threats from multiple directions simultaneously. The Campanian cavalry, approaching from behind the Gallic formation, began attacking warriors on the rear edges of the testudo. Men turned to face the mounted threat, opening gaps in the overhead shield protection. Roman infantry, seeing these gaps, pushed harder from the front. Soldiers on the second and third lines of Roman formation stabbed downward with their pila into the testudo's top, now partially exposed. The formation that had seemed impenetrable began fragmenting into smaller units, each trying to maintain protection while facing attacks from multiple directions. Once the testudo shattered into individual groups, the battle became methodical slaughter. Gallic warriors, individually fierce but now isolated, faced Roman infantry that fought as coordinated units. The manipular system, which had proven itself against Samnite discipline and Gallic fury throughout the day, now demonstrated its final advantage. It could maintain killing efficiency even during pursuit and mop-up operations. The Gauls died where they stood. Those who tried to flee were run down by cavalry. Those who surrendered, and Livy records 8,000 prisoners, were bound and herded to the rear. The Battle of Centinum proper was over, but the dying had only begun. Ancient battles rarely concluded with the final formation's collapse. The pursuit phase, when victorious armies chased defeated enemies across countryside, typically produced more casualties than the battle itself. And the Romans, having watched their consul deliberately die to secure victory, were in no mood for mercy. The Roman cavalry, fresh from breaking the Gallic testudo, pursued fleeing enemies across the Centinum plain and into the surrounding territory. The Gauls fled north toward their Adriatic settlements. The scattered Samnites who had escaped their camp's destruction ran south toward their mountain homeland. Historical sources suggest most battle casualties occurred not during the main engagement, but during this pursuit phase, when exhausted men running for their lives were cut down by mounted warriors or light infantry designed for exactly this purpose. Livy provides casualty figures for the coalition forces that, while possibly inflated by Roman pride, remain our best historical evidence. 25,000 enemy dead, 8,000 captured. Total coalition casualties, 33,000 from an army that probably numbered 40,000 to 50,000. That's a casualty rate exceeding 65%. Catastrophic by any military standard. Other ancient sources provide different numbers. Orosius claims 40,000 killed, while Diodorus Siculus reports 100,000, a figure so exaggerated that modern historians dismiss it entirely, possibly representing cumulative casualties across multiple campaigns rather than a single battle. Roman casualties stood at 8,700 total, according to Livy's specific accounting. The breakdown reveals the crisis Decius had faced. 7,000 Romans killed on the left wing under his command, only 1,700 on the right wing under Fabius. That's a 4-to-1 casualty ratio between wings, demonstrating how close the Roman left came to complete collapse before Decius's devotio and the subsequent rally. Overall casualty exchange favored Rome roughly 3-to-1. They inflicted 3 times the losses they suffered. A decisive but not overwhelming tactical victory considering they faced near-even numbers. The Samnite camp fell to assault, likely meaning Roman forces used scaling ladders and concentrated attacks on gates to breach the fortifications. Everything inside became spoils. Supplies, equipment, military standards that held religious significance. The loss of standards was considered deeply shameful in ancient warfare. Armies literally carried their honor on poles topped with eagles or other symbols. Fabius Maximus Rullianus vowed a temple to Jupiter Victor during the battle, promising the god a share of enemy spoils in exchange for victory. That temple would be built in Rome, a permanent monument to this day's fighting. Publius Decius Mus's body wasn't found until the day after the battle. According to Livy's account, search parties located his corpse beneath a pile of dead Gallic warriors, exactly paralleling his father's death at Viceris, where the elder Decius was found similarly surrounded by slain enemies. Whether this actually occurred or became symbolic embellishment is debatable. Both deaths follow the same pattern. suggesting either family tradition or later myth-making. What's documented is that Decius received a public funeral with full military honors. His death became the defining exemplum virtutis, example of virtue, that Roman educators would cite for generations. But warfare doesn't end cleanly with battles. 5,000 Samnite survivors, having escaped the battlefield carnage, attempted to retreat through Paeligni territory, a region in central Italy inhabited by people who, while not actively fighting at Centinum, had their own complex relationship with Rome. The Paeligni, seeing weakened Samnite forces staggering through their lands, attacked them. Livy records 1,000 more Samnites killed in this opportunistic assault. Exhausted, demoralized, leaderless warriors were easy prey for locals settling old scores or simply looting vulnerable targets. The Roman army remained on the battlefield for days, conducting the grim logistics of victory. Corpses needed processing, stripping equipment from the dead, separating Roman from enemy bodies, arranging mass cremations. The smell alone was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of bodies in summer heat created conditions that threatened disease outbreaks. Wounded soldiers required treatment, prisoner management, security against potential enemy counterattacks. Fabius Maximus Rullianus departed for Rome to celebrate his triumph, the victory parade that honored successful generals. Decius's legions remained in Etruria, guarding against potential Etruscan attacks. The separation of commands. Fabius celebrating while Decius's troops stood garrison duty, highlighted the asymmetry of their fates. One general returned home to glory. The other, having saved Rome through ritual sacrifice, got a funeral. But the war hadn't ended with Centinum. The Etruscans, whose withdrawal had fractured Ignatius's coalition, still needed pacification. And Rome's appetite for conquest, awakened by complete victory, wouldn't be satisfied with a single, decisive battle. The weeks following Centinum revealed a truth about ancient warfare that dry casualty figures obscure. Battles end, but dying continues. The Etruscans, who had withdrawn to defend their homeland before the battle, now faced Roman vengeance. Gnaeus Fulvius, the propraetor who had conducted the diversionary raid on Clusium and Perugia during the battle, engaged Etruscan forces attempting to return to the coalition. He defeated them decisively. Perugia and Clusium together lost 3,000 men, according to Livy's accounting. These weren't warriors caught in a single climactic engagement. They were losses accumulated through raids, skirmishes, small battles that historical sources barely mention, but which killed just as certainly as Centinum's major combat. The Etruscans sued for peace. Roman terms were harsh, but not genocidal. They would become Socia, allies, maintaining local autonomy, but surrendering control of foreign policy to Rome. They would provide troops when Rome demanded. They would allow Roman citizens to settle in their territory. They would, in essence, exchange independence for survival. Most Etruscan cities accepted these terms. Perugia continued resisting, requiring additional Roman military operations that wouldn't conclude until 294 BC. The Senone Gauls, their military power shattered at Centinum, withdrew to their settlements along the Adriatic coast. They didn't immediately make peace. That would require another war in 283 BC, when they would be effectively destroyed as an independent people. But their capacity for major military operations ended at Centinum. The psychological impact of the battle, the devotios' witnessed effect, and the methodical destruction of their testudo formation created a lasting impression that historians suggest diminished Gallic willingness to engage Roman armies in open battle. The Samnites, having lost their greatest general and suffered catastrophic casualties, retreated to their mountain strongholds. But they didn't surrender. Samnite raids continued into Roman and allied territory. In 294 BC, they launched attacks on areas around the Liris and Vulturnus rivers, traditional invasion routes into Campania. Roman forces pursued them, culminating in another battle near Caiatia, where consuls Appius Claudius and Lucius Volumnius defeated them again. The Third Samnite War wouldn't officially end until 290 BC, 5 years after Centinum. In 291 BC, Rome founded the colony of Venusia in Apulia, strategically positioned to control approaches to Samnite territory. This wasn't just military occupation, it was demographic warfare. 20,000 Roman citizens settled in Venusia, creating a permanent Roman presence that could monitor Samnite movements, intercept communications between Samnite cities, and serve as a base for future operations. The colony's founding represented Rome's new approach to conquered territory. Don't just defeat enemies. Make their future resistance structurally impossible through settlement and fortification. The human cost extended beyond casualty figures. 33,000 coalition dead meant families destroyed across 4 separate peoples. 8,000 prisoners meant lives spent in slavery. Crucially important in ancient economies, but devastatingly personal for those sold. 8,700 Roman dead meant widows, orphans, and communities forced to absorb losses that contemporary demographic models suggest approach 10% of Rome's military-age male population when including allies. And these figures only counted Centinum itself, not the years of warfare before and after. The individual stories vanished into historical silence. We know commanders' names: Fabius, Decius, Ignatius. But the anonymous Hastatus who killed Ignatius at the camp gates, the Gallic warrior who threw the javelin that killed Decius, the Campanian cavalryman whose charge broke the testudo, the Samnite soldier who escaped only to die in Paeligni territory, their names, their motivations. Their final thoughts disappeared when Livy compressed thousands of personal tragedies into statistical summary. But those unnamed warriors determined outcomes that shaped the next 5 centuries of Western civilization. The Battle of Sentinum resolved more than a military crisis. It answered a question that had dominated Italian politics for a century. Could any coalition defeat Rome? The answer was now documented in blood. Even the maximum possible alliance, 4 peoples, potentially 80,000 warriors, unified command, strategic coordination, had failed catastrophically. The strategic consequences cascaded through Italian politics faster than armies could march. The Etruscans and Umbrians, whose withdrawal before the battle had fractured Ignatius's coalition, now completed their submission. They formally accepted Roman allied status, becoming Saki in the system that would define Italian political organization for the next 2 centuries. Local city governments continued functioning. Perugia kept its magistrates, Clusium its consuls, Arretium its aristocracy. But foreign policy became Rome's monopoly. These cities couldn't make independent alliances, couldn't wage wars without Roman approval, couldn't refuse Roman demands for military contributions. In exchange, they received Roman protection and access to Roman markets. For aristocrats in these cities, the deal often proved profitable. Roman campaigns meant command opportunities, booty, slaves. Resisting Rome became less attractive than profiting from association with Roman power. The Umbrians, caught between Etruscan submission and Roman pressure, similarly accepted allied status. They had contributed fewer forces to Ignatius's coalition and suffered correspondingly lighter Roman retaliation. Their submission formalized what Centinum had demonstrated. Resistance was futile. but cooperation could be lucrative. The Sentinum Gauls withdrew to their Adriatic territories, their military power broken. They didn't immediately sue for peace, but their capacity for major military operations ended at Centinum. In 283 BC, a border incident would give Rome the excuse to destroy them completely. Roman forces under Publius Cornelius Dolabella would kill or enslave most of the Senoni population, seizing their territory for Roman settlement. The Ager Gallicus, Gallic lands, became Roman overnight. But the psychological impact mattered more than territorial gains. The Gauls, who had sacked Rome in 390 BC and terrorized Italian peoples for generations, had been methodically destroyed at Centinum despite their feared war chariots and legendary ferocity. Roman tactical superiority wasn't theoretical anymore. It was documented through Gallic corpses piled on the Sentinum plain. Future Gallic peoples would remember this when contemplating warfare with Rome. The Samnites, having lost Gellius Ignatius and the strategic vision he represented, retreated to their mountains. They continued fighting until 290 BC. But they fought alone. No other Italian people would answer Samnite calls for alliance. Centinum had proven that fighting Rome, even in coalition, led to destruction. Better to submit early, gain favorable terms, and profit from association with inevitable Roman dominance. The final Samnite submission in 290 BC included harsh terms, territory cessions, tribute payments, demographic colonies like Venusia cutting their homeland into disconnected regions. The soci system that emerged from these submissions would define Roman power for the next 2 centuries. At Centinum itself, Livy notes that allied contingents already outnumbered Roman citizen legions. This wasn't unusual, it was standard. By the time of the Second Punic War in 218 BC, Roman military power would consist of 3 allied soldiers for every 2 Roman citizens. The system worked because it gave local elites reasons to cooperate. Command positions in allied contingents, booty shares, land grants, even eventual pathways to Roman citizenship for their descendants. Resistance offered death. Cooperation offered profit and prestige. This pragmatic calculation transformed Italian politics from multipolar competition into Roman hegemony within a single generation. The First Punic War, beginning in 264 BC against Carthage, would demonstrate the system's power. Rome could sustain massive casualties because Italy now provided manpower. Roman unification, which Centinum made inevitable, created the demographic and economic base for Mediterranean empire. Without Centinum, no Punic Wars. Without the Punic Wars, no Roman conquest of Greece, Spain, North Africa. The chain of causation stretched across centuries. But Centinum was the link that couldn't be broken. Historians mark Centinum as the point of no return in Italian unification. Before 295 BC, you could imagine alternative futures. Etruscan city-states maintaining independence, Samnite mountain republics holding their territories, a multipolar Italian peninsula with balance of power politics similar to classical Greece. After Centinum, only one future remained possible: Roman dominance. The battle proved that no coalition, no matter how large or well coordinated, could defeat Roman military organization. But military superiority alone doesn't explain how Rome transformed dozens of independent peoples into a unified Italian system. The soci system emerged gradually from the ashes of Italian resistance. But its outlines became clear in the decade following Centinum. The formula was consistent. Defeated peoples became allies, not subjects. They kept their local governments, their own laws, their cultural identities. But foreign policy, the power to make war, negotiate treaties, form alliances, belonged exclusively to Rome. And when Rome went to war, allies provided troops. The genius of this system was that it gave local elites incentives to cooperate. An aristocrat in Perugia or Clusium who accepted Roman allied status didn't lose wealth or status. He gained opportunities, command of allied contingents in Roman campaigns, shares of booty from successful wars, contracts supplying Roman armies, land grants from conquered territories. Eventually, for the most cooperative families, pathways to Roman citizenship itself. Fighting Rome meant risking everything. Cooperating with Rome meant profiting while maintaining local power. The calculation was obvious. At Centinum, allied contingents fighting for Rome already outnumbered Roman citizen legions. This pattern would intensify. By 218 BC, when Hannibal invaded Italy, Rome could field armies consisting of 3 allied soldiers for every 2 Roman citizens. The Socii system created military superiority through demographic aggregation. Italy contained perhaps 4 million to 5 million people in the early 3rd century BC. Rome proper, perhaps 300,000. But by making Italian allies contribute troops, Rome could mobilize Italian manpower as if it were Roman manpower. The manipular system, tested at Sentinum against every alternative Italian military tradition, proved superior to all of them. The Samnites fought with similar equipment and tactics. They couldn't break Roman lines. The Gauls brought ferocity and shock tactics. They were ground down by systematic combat. The Etruscans contributed wealth and sophisticated equipment. It didn't compensate for inferior tactical flexibility. The testudo the Gauls formed in their last stand used Roman-derived tactics, demonstrating that even enemies recognized Roman methods as superior. Roman tactical doctrine emphasized adaptability, unit cohesion, and the ability to maintain killing efficiency over extended periods. The triplex aces, 3-line system, allowed fresh troops to replace exhausted fighters without breaking formation. The manipular organization created checkerboard formations that could adapt to terrain and enemy tactics. The combination of pilum volleys disrupting enemy formations and gladius combat in close quarters maximized Roman advantages in discipline and training. After Centinum, no Italian people developed alternative systems. They adopted Roman-style organization or accepted defeat. This military superiority, combined with the Socii system's economic incentives, created the foundation for Mediterranean empire. The First Punic War against Carthage, beginning in 264 BC, would have been impossible without Italian unification providing the manpower for sustained naval and military operations. The Second Punic War, when Hannibal invaded Italy and attempted to break Roman power by liberating Italian allies, would fail partly because those allies recognized they profited more from remaining with Rome than from independence under Carthaginian protection. The conquest of Greece, Macedonia, Spain, North Africa, and eventually the entire Mediterranean basin, all depended on the demographic and economic power that Italian unification provided. Centinum created the possibility space for everything that followed. Without it, Rome remains a regional Italian power competing with Etruscans, Samnites, and Greek colonies. With it, Rome becomes the dominant Mediterranean superpower that shapes Western civilization for the next 7 centuries. The warriors who died on the Sentinum plain couldn't have known they were determining the fate of civilizations. But they were. The Battle of Centinum left 4 distinct military legacies that shaped Roman warfare for generations. First, Fabian strategy became recognized doctrine. Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus's patient approach, refusing to attack, forcing enemies to exhaust themselves, striking only when advantage was overwhelming, was validated by his victory over the Samnites. His great-grandson, Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, would employ identical tactics against Hannibal during the Second Punic War. When Hannibal invaded Italy in 218 BC and destroyed multiple Roman armies through superior tactical genius, Verrucosus was appointed dictator. He refused battle, shadowed Hannibal's army, cut supply lines, attacked foraging parties, and waited. Roman public opinion hated this approach. They wanted aggressive confrontation. They nicknamed him Cunctator, the delayer, as an insult. But Verrucosus understood what his great-grandfather had demonstrated at Centinum. Patience defeats aggression if you have superior logistics and discipline. After catastrophic defeats at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, Romans finally recognized Fabian tactics as legitimate doctrine. The strategy Rullianus proved at Sentinum became military wisdom cited for centuries. Modern military theory still references Fabian strategy as a recognized approach to warfare against superior tactical opponents. Second, devotio became a documented tactical weapon with proven psychological effects. 3 generations of the Decius family performed the ritual across 61 years. The grandfather at Viserys in 340 BC, the father at Centinum in 295 BC, the grandson allegedly attempting it against Pyrrhus of Epirus at Osculum in 279 BC. The consistency across 3 generations suggests this wasn't desperate improvisation, but calculated family tradition. Sources indicate Pyrrhus, hearing reports of the planned devotio, ordered his troops to avoid killing the grandson specifically, attempting to neutralize the ritual's psychological power by preventing its completion. The devotio worked because both sides believed it worked. Roman soldiers, seeing their commander deliberately die in prescribed ritual fashion, believed divine protection now covered them, transforming panic into religious fury. Enemies witnessing the same act confronted supernatural implications in their own belief systems. Either their gods were weaker than Roman gods, or Roman willingness to sacrifice commanders indicated fanaticism that couldn't be defeated through normal combat. Modern military psychology recognizes morale as tactically significant, but Romans weaponized belief itself through formalized ritual sacrifice. Third, the manipular system proved superior to every alternative Italian military tradition. At Centinum, Romans fought Samnites using similar heavy infantry tactics, Gauls employing shock cavalry and war chariots, Etruscans bringing sophisticated equipment and wealth. All failed against Roman tactical flexibility. The triplex acies allowed continuous combat by cycling fresh troops forward. The manipular checkerboard formation adapted to terrain and enemy tactics. The combination of disrupting pilum volleys and close-quarters gladius combat maximized Roman advantages in training and discipline. After Centinum, no Italian military force developed competitive alternatives. They either adopted Roman methods or accepted Roman dominance. Fourth, coalition warfare lessons became strategic doctrine. The Clusium diversion that fractured Ignatius's coalition, ordering raids on Etruscan heartland to force withdrawal from battle, became a template. When facing coalitions, target the weakest member's homeland. Force them to choose between alliance obligations and immediate survival. The tactic worked because coalition members never fully trusted each other. Etruscans cooperated with Samnites against Rome, but they wouldn't sacrifice their cities for Samnite victory. Roman strategic planning incorporated this understanding. Coalitions were inherently vulnerable to divide and conquer tactics because members' interests never perfectly aligned. These four legacies, Fabian patience, devotio as psychological weapon, manipular superiority, and coalition fracturing, became foundational to Roman military doctrine. They weren't invented at Centinum, but they were proven there against maximum opposition. Military organizations are conservative by necessity. They adopt tactics only after documented success. Centinum provided that documentation. The battle became the case study Roman commanders cited when justifying similar approaches in future wars. Publius Decius Mus's devotio became one of the defining exempla virtutis, moral examples in Roman education. For centuries, Roman boys learned about the Deci as illustrations of proper civic duty, the willingness to sacrifice individual life for collective survival. Cicero references the devotiones in his philosophical works. Livy dedicates substantial space to the ritual's details. The story shaped Roman self-conception as a people whose values justified their dominance. But our primary source for Centinum's details is Livy's Ab Urbi Condita, from the founding of the city, written approximately 300 years after the battle during Augustus's reign. Livy drew on earlier sources that are now lost, possibly Fabius Pictor, possibly Claudius Quadrigarius, possibly official state records. We can't independently verify his account. Other ancient sources provide less detail. Diodorus Siculus mentions the battle briefly. Orosius provides casualty figures. But Livy's narrative in Book 10, chapters 27 through 29, remains the most comprehensive surviving account. This creates obvious historical limitations. Livy wrote during a period of Augustan religious revival, emphasizing traditional Roman piety. The devotio story fit perfectly into that ideology. Dramatic, pious, proving divine favor for Rome. Was it recorded accurately, or shaped by 3 centuries of retelling to serve ideological purposes? Scholars generally trust the basic narrative. A major battle occurred at Centinum. A 4-people coalition fought Rome. Publius Decius Mus died during the battle. Rome won decisively. The coalition's existence, the key commanders' identities, the strategic circumstances. Multiple sources confirm these. But specific details, the exact devotio formula, the psychological effects on Gauls, precise casualty breakdowns, individual tactical moments, remain uncertain. Livy's claim that he's reporting from pontifical books suggests he accessed official religious records. But 3 centuries allow substantial embellishment even in preserved documents. The devotio itself, as a documented ritual, appears in multiple contexts beyond Centinum, suggesting it wasn't Livian invention. The formula's archaic language, the specific deities invoked, the ritual requirements. These details suggest preservation of actual religious practice, rather than later fabrication. But whether Publius Decius specifically said, quote, 8, or whether Livy reconstructed likely words from standard formulas remains debatable. What matters historically is that Romans believed the devotio occurred, believed it affected battle outcomes, and structured military doctrine accordingly. Physically, Centinum remained occupied well into the imperial period. The modern archaeological site at Sassoferrato preserves substantial remains. Foundations of municipal walls showing defensive evolution, a grid of paved streets demonstrating Roman urban planning, an industrial quarter with ceramic and metalwork evidence. The most striking discoveries are exquisite mosaics from the imperial period depicting the mystery cult god Mithras and the Hellenistic deity Ion, demonstrating how the city evolved from battleground to prosperous Roman cultural center. The battlefield's exact location within Centinum's territory remains uncertain, probably the plain immediately north of the ancient city. but archaeological evidence of the battle itself hasn't been definitively identified. Temples erected thanking the gods for victory provided permanent commemoration. Fabius Maximus Rullianus vowed a temple to Jupiter Victor during the battle, promising construction if granted victory. The temple was built in Rome, though its exact location remains debated among scholars. Possibly on the Palatine Hill, possibly the Quirinal. It stood as physical reminder of Centinum's significance. Yet Centinum itself, despite its strategic importance, gradually faded from popular historical memory. By the late Republic and Empire, other battles dominated Roman consciousness. The Punic Wars against Carthage, Marius's victories over Germanic tribes, Caesar's Gallic conquests, civil wars determining imperial succession. Why did Sentinum fade when battles like Cannae, Zama, and Pharsalus remained famous? Partly timing. It occurred during Italian wars before Rome became a Mediterranean power, so it lacked the international drama of later conflicts. Partly complexity. Four peoples, coalition politics, internal Italian affairs weren't as narratively clean as Rome versus Carthage or Caesar versus Pompey. Partly sources. Only Livy provides detailed narrative, while multiple sources covered later battles. And partly modern historiography. Scholars focusing on Roman imperial expansion naturally emphasized Mediterranean conquests over Italian unification. But Roman commanders remembered. Fabius Maximus Verrucosus consciously emulated his great-grandfather's tactics. Decius's family devotiones remain cited examples of ultimate patriotism. Military historians studied Centinum's lessons in coalition warfare and tactical flexibility. The battle shaped Roman military doctrine even as its popular memory faded. It was the foundation on which later victories built. Invisible, but essential. Certain moments in history function as hinges, points where the door of possibility swings from multiple potential futures toward a single realized outcome. Centinum was such a moment. Before 295 BC, multiple Italian futures remained plausible. You could imagine Etruscan city-states maintaining independence through wealth and fortification. Samnite mountain republics holding their territories through defensive warfare and difficult terrain. A multipolar Italian peninsula with balance of power politics, rotating alliances, and regional hegemonies. After Centinum, only one future remained: Roman dominance. What made Centinum unique wasn't just Roman victory. Rome won many battles. It was the combination of three factors that would never recur. First, maximum coalition unity. Ignatius assembled the largest anti-Roman alliance ever formed in Italy. Four separate peoples with different military traditions, different political systems, different territories, united by shared recognition that Rome must be stopped. This wasn't opportunistic bandwagoning. It was strategic calculation by intelligent leaders who understood Roman expansion threatened everyone. If this coalition couldn't stop Rome, no coalition could. Second, Roman vulnerability. In 295 BC, Rome wasn't yet the Mediterranean superpower that would dominate later centuries. The Republic was roughly 200 years old, still consolidating power in central Italy, still building the institutional strength that would characterize imperial Rome. Losing at Centinum wouldn't have ended Roman existence, but it would have shattered the appearance of inevitability that dominated Roman expansion. Italian peoples contemplating resistance would have seen proof that coalitions could defeat Rome. Roman allies might have questioned their association with power that wasn't actually invincible. Third, existential stakes both sides recognized. This wasn't peripheral warfare over border adjustments or tribute payments. Gellius Ignatius understood that Samnite survival required breaking Roman power completely. Fabius Maximus Rullianus and Publius Decius Mus understood that losing to a four-people coalition would fracture Italian alliances Rome depended upon. Both sides threw maximum available force at Centinum. Both sides accepted tactics they normally wouldn't risk. Ignatius's coalition building, Decius's devotio. Desperation produced innovation, and innovation produced the most important Italian battle between Rome's founding and Mediterranean empire. Consider the counterfactual. If Rome lost at Centinum, what follows? The Roman alliance system, predicated on appearance of invincibility, probably fractures. Latin colonies might maintain loyalty, but Campanian cities, Apulian communities, recently submitted territories, all would reconsider their association with defeated power. The coalition, emboldened by success, doesn't dissolve. Etruscans, Samnites, Umbrians, and Gauls, having cooperated successfully once, maintain coordination. Subsequent Roman campaigns face unified opposition rather than isolated peoples. Rome probably survives as regional power in Latium. The Republic's institutions, citizen dedication, and strategic location near the Tiber protected it even during disasters like the Gallic sack of 390 BC. But Mediterranean empire becomes implausible. Without Italian manpower, Rome can't sustain the Punic War's massive casualty rates. Carthage dominates the Western Mediterranean unchallenged. Greek kingdoms in the east maintain independence. Western civilization develops along completely different trajectories. Perhaps Carthaginian rather than Roman. Perhaps multipolar rather than imperial. But Rome won. The victory was documented by sources on both sides. Livy preserves Roman accounts, while references in Greek and later sources confirm the battle's reality and significance. 33,000 coalition casualties against 8,700 Roman losses. A casualty exchange ratio of roughly 3.8 to 1. The Samnites broken as military power, the Gauls devastated, the Etruscans and Umbrians submitting. Within 5 years, organized Italian resistance collapsed. Within a generation, Roman dominance became unchallengeable. The chain of causation stretches across centuries with remarkable clarity. Centinum enabled Italian unification. Italian unification provided manpower for the First Punic War, beginning in 264 BC. Victory over Carthage gave Rome control of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. The Second Punic War tested but ultimately confirmed Roman Mediterranean dominance. Macedonian wars brought Greece under Roman influence. Spanish wars extended Roman power to the Atlantic. By 100 BC, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean basin, fundamentally shaping Western legal systems, languages, architecture, governance, and culture for the next 2,000 years. None of that happens without Centinum. It was the battle that proved Roman military superiority wasn't regional accident, but systematic advantage. It was the engagement that demonstrated coalition warfare couldn't overcome Roman tactical flexibility and strategic patience. It was the moment when Italian peoples recognized resistance was futile, but cooperation was profitable. It was the hinge on which history turned from multipolar Italian competition to Roman imperial dominance. 40,000 men fought. 25,000 died. One consul sought death and found it. One general employed patience until it paid. A coalition shattered. Rome survived, and the Western world was never the same. The Battle of Sentinum fulfilled every impossible promise documented in historical sources. Publius Decius Mus performed the devotio ritual that weaponized Roman religious belief into tactical advantage, transforming a collapsing left wing into victorious advance through his deliberately sought death. Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus demonstrated the patient attrition strategy his great-grandson would use against Hannibal, proving that discipline and superior logistics could defeat numerical parity if commanders possessed the patience to wait for enemy exhaustion. The diversionary raid on Clusium that fractured Ignatius's four-people coalition showcased strategic deception that became Roman military doctrine for generations. Think about the specific mathematics contemporary sources recorded. Approximately 80,000 warriors assembled, the maximum Italian coalition ever formed against Rome. Roman strategic deception reduced that to 40,000 opposing 40,000 Roman and allied forces. The battle produced 33,000 coalition casualties against 8,700 Roman losses. That's nearly a 4-to-1 casualty exchange ratio achieved through systematic tactical superiority. 7,000 Romans died on the left wing, saving the legion from complete collapse. 1,700 died on the right wing, where Fabius's patience minimized losses while maximizing enemy exhaustion. The devotio's specific formula, preserved in Livy's account, demonstrated how Romans weaponized their own belief systems. I carry before me terror and rout and carnage and blood and the wrath of all the gods, those above and those below. This wasn't just religious ritual. It was psychological warfare with documented effects on both Roman morale and enemy cohesion. Whether divine intervention occurred or belief itself shaped battlefield behavior doesn't matter tactically. Roman soldiers fought with conviction that gods protected them. Enemies fought knowing their opponents considered death itself a tactical weapon. But beyond tactics and casualties, Centinum determined who would control the Mediterranean world for the next 5 centuries. The battle proved that no Italian coalition, regardless of size or coordination, could defeat Roman military organization. It established Italian unification as inevitable rather than possible. It created the demographic and economic base that enabled Mediterranean conquest. Every subsequent Roman achievement, defeating Carthage, conquering Greece, dominating Spain and North Africa, depended on the Italian manpower that Centinum's victory secured. The warriors who died on that dusty plain near Centinum couldn't have known they were shaping civilizational trajectories. The Hastatus who thrust his gladius into enemy flesh was securing Roman dominance centuries later. The Gallic warrior who threw the javelin that killed Decius Mus was inadvertently enabling Roman conquest of Gaul 2 centuries afterward. Gellius Ignatius, dying at his own camp gates, was closing the door on Italian independence forever. History is humans making desperate decisions in crisis moments without seeing the implications that stretch across centuries. The Battle of Sentinum looked to contemporaries like just another engagement in Rome's endless Italian wars. Important, certainly, but not obviously world-changing. Only afterward, watching Italian resistance collapse, watching Roman power expand unopposed, watching Mediterranean empire emerge from Italian unification, did observers recognize what that day in 295 BC actually meant. It was the moment Roman dominance became inevitable. It was the battle that proved Roman military superiority systematically rather than accidentally. It was the engagement where 4 peoples threw everything they had at Rome and lost anyway, teaching every future opponent that resistance was futile. 80,000 warriors massed in the largest coalition ancient Italy ever assembled. 25,000 died. 8,000 were enslaved. 1 consul sought death through ancient ritual and found it. 1 general waited with patience that seemed like cowardice until it proved to be genius. A coalition that should have overwhelmed Rome shattered into fleeing fragments. And Rome survived, strengthened, unstoppable. Western civilization's trajectory was set by anonymous soldiers making split-second decisions in the chaos of ancient combat, by commanders willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives, for victory, by the accumulated weight of tactical decisions that proved one military system superior to all alternatives. The Battle of Centinum remains largely forgotten in popular historical consciousness, overshadowed by more dramatic conflicts like Cannae or Alesia. But it was the hinge on which everything else turned. It was the moment when possibility space collapsed from multiple potential futures to a single Roman-dominated outcome. It was the foundation on which Mediterranean empire was built. The battle that proved Roman military superiority, validated devotio as tactical weapon, demonstrated Fabian patience, and established Italian unification as inevitable. 40,000 fought. 33,000 became casualties. One man's ritual death saved an army. One coalition's maximum effort proved insufficient. And the ancient world was never the same.